She wasn't running from danger. She was running from the people she once trusted, and today her life depends on a stranger. The morning the story truly began was colder than usual for a small town in Colorado. Willow Street was quiet, still half asleep beneath a pale sky, and I was standing on my porch with a cup of lukewarm coffee, wondering yet again how a life could look full from the outside and still feel painfully empty from the inside. My name is Elena Carter. I was 38 at the time. And I had mastered the art of disappearing in plain sight. People in town knew me as the quiet woman who lived alone near the hill. I wasn't famous, I wasn't social, and I certainly wasn't the kind of woman whose life crossed paths with unexpected miracles. At least that's what I used to believe. 2 years before that cold morning, I walked out of a marriage that had drained every warm color out of my life. My ex-husband, Paul, loved to talk about himself, his dreams, his business plans, his brilliance. He spoke so much that there was never space for my voice. And in the loudness of his world, I slowly became silent. By the time I left him, it didn't even feel like a breakup. It felt like waking up from a long, exhausting nap. Since then, my life had fallen into a predictable rhythm. Wake up. Drink coffee. Walk to the shed behind the house where I painted wooden ornaments for a small local craft shop. Eat alone. Sleep alone. Repeat. I didn't hate life. I just didn't feel it. But on that quiet morning, something subtle changed. A sound broke the silence, steady, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat against the earth. Thud, thud, thud. I leaned forward and saw a man across the road, working near the old abandoned cabin that had been empty for nearly a decade. For a moment, the soft golden sunlight brushed across his face. Tall, broad shoulders, dark brown hair, work boots covered in dust, and eyes that looked like they had been carrying more stories than they had ever spoken aloud. He didn't see me. He was busy chopping pieces of old damaged wood near the cabin's porch. His movements were strong but quiet, like a man who had spent his life working with his hands instead of words. I didn't know who he was, and I didn't care. At least that's what I told myself. But for the first time in months, I didn't finish my coffee. I just watched him for a few seconds longer, and something warm flickered inside me, almost like a tiny, quiet spark. By afternoon, curiosity won. I walked across the street under the pretense of checking the mailbox. The cabin was still half broken, its windows dusty, its roof sagging slightly. The man was now repairing the front door, hammer in hand. He didn't look up until I accidentally stepped on a dry leaf. He paused, turned, and for a split second, our eyes met. Something tightened in my chest. His eyes weren't the cold type you expect from a stranger. They held tiredness, yes, but also gentleness, something steady, something safe. "Morning," he said, voice low and calm. I nodded, suddenly conscious of my mismatched sweater and messy hair. "Hi. Are you planning to live here?" I asked, immediately regretting how intrusive it sounded. He wiped the dust from his hands and gave a small, almost shy smile. "Yeah, trying to fix it up. I'm Aaron Wells." The name suited him, simple, strong, grounded. "I'm Elena," I replied, clearing my throat. "That cabin has been empty for years." He nodded. "That's what the town office told me. But it's got good bones, just needs some patience." Something in the way he said the word patience made my chest warm. Paul, my ex, never had patience. Not for people. Not for flaws. Definitely not for me. But this stranger, he seemed like the type who listened to the world before speaking into it. "I hope the place treats you well," I said, taking a small step back. His gaze softened. "I think it will." And just like that, the conversation ended. Simple, short, warm. But that was enough. I hadn't felt that kind of quiet ease with a man in a very long time. Over the next week, Aaron became a familiar presence on Willow Street. He repaired windows. He rebuilt the porch. He painted the walls of the cabin with slow, deliberate strokes. He wasn't talkative. But he wasn't distant either. He existed in this gentle middle ground, present, kind, and peacefully silent. Every morning when I stepped out with my coffee, he waved. Just a wave. A small gesture. But somehow it filled the emptiness of my porch with something warmer. One day, I found myself lingering outside longer than necessary. And when he noticed, he walked across the road. "Need help with something?" he asked. I froze. Because the answer was yes. I needed help with loneliness, with silence, with the shadow that had been living in my chest ever since I left my marriage. But I said, "Actually, yes. My shed door gets stuck sometimes." He followed me to the back, and with one firm lift, he set the wooden frame back in place. "There you go," he said. "You make it look easy." He shrugged lightly. "Hard things get easier when you've done them enough times." I wondered if he was only talking about doors. And then he noticed the wooden ornaments scattered across my work table. "You make these?" he asked, running his fingers gently over the polished surface of a handmade star. "Yeah, just for a local shop." "They're beautiful." I blinked. Paul never complimented my work. Not once. He said it was a cute hobby. He never called anything I made beautiful. The warmth inside me stirred again. "Thank you," I whispered, but inside it felt like something far bigger. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. Why was the simple man with quiet hands suddenly filling spaces inside me that had been empty for years? Why did I feel seen, noticed, valued in ways I had forgotten were possible? I didn't have the answer, but for the first time in a long time, I was willing to find out. The sun had barely risen when Ethan Walker stepped outside the old wooden cabin. A thin layer of mist floated above the quiet valley, and the cold air felt sharper than yesterday. He rubbed his hands together, took a deep breath, and reminded himself why he was here. The mysterious girl he rescued, Lena Brooks, was still inside, resting after the terrifying night she had survived. Ethan knew trouble would follow her, but he also knew he couldn't turn his back on someone who desperately needed help. Ethan walked toward the small shed near the trees. He needed time to think, to understand what Lena had told him before she collapsed. She kept repeating one sentence. "They're coming for me. Please don't let them find me." Her voice had trembled with a kind of fear that didn't come from ordinary danger. It was the kind of fear that grows from betrayal, from being hunted by someone who once pretended to care. Inside the shed, Ethan opened an old metal box, and on the one he hadn't touched in years. Inside were a few things from his past, the past he hoped he had left behind. A badge, a broken compass, and a photograph of people he once trusted. People who changed his life forever, people who pushed him away when he needed them the most. He had sworn he would never get involved in anything dangerous again. But life doesn't always honor the promises we make to ourselves. He placed the box aside and started a small generator. If Lena's pursuers were close, he needed some form of communication, even if it was risky. The radio crackled to life with static. No one should be looking for him, not anymore. But as the static shifted into fragmented voices, he felt a sudden unease. Inside the cabin, Lena opened her eyes slowly. She had woken several times during the night, but the weight of exhaustion always pulled her back. This time she sat up, holding the blanket tightly around her shoulders. Her head still throbbed, but she remembered everything. The chase, the narrow escape, the forest, and finally the stranger who saved her life. She didn't know Ethan, but the sincerity in his eyes convinced her she could trust him. At least for now. She stood up, her legs still shaky, and looked around. The cabin was small but warm, filled with old books, maps, and a fireplace that still glowed with dying embers. Whoever Ethan was, he lived a quiet life, far away from the rest of the world. When she stepped outside, Ethan turned quickly. "You should be resting," he said, trying to keep his voice calm. "I've rested enough," Lena replied softly, "and I need to explain everything before it's too late." Ethan nodded and led her to a wooden bench. She sat down slowly, breathing deeply, trying to gather strength. "They're called the Halverton Group," she finally said, "a private organization. They pretend they're researching climate data, but they're building something dangerous, something that could destroy towns, maybe entire regions." Ethan frowned. "What does that have to do with you?" "I worked for them," she said, "not in anything important, just data analysis. But one day I saw something I was never supposed to see. A file, a test report, proof that they were planning something catastrophic. I reported it to the wrong people. Ethan clenched his jaw. So they came after you. They tried to make it look like an accident, Lena whispered. When I escaped, I didn't know where else to go. I kept running until I reached these mountains. Ethan sat back, thinking, if what you're saying is true, they won't stop. I know, Lena answered, but if I can get this data to the right place, the truth will come out. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small flash drive. Everything is here. Ethan exhaled slowly, staring at the flash drive. He knew the kind of people who protected dangerous secrets, and he knew exactly how far they would go to erase evidence and witnesses. Before Ethan could respond, the radio inside the shed crackled again. This time, a clear voice broke through the static. Target confirmed. Footprints found near the northern ridge, proceeding toward the cabin. Ethan's blood ran cold. Lena froze. They found me. Without another word, Ethan grabbed her hand and rushed back inside the cabin. We need to move right now. But where? Lena asked, panic rising in her voice. There's an old trail behind the cabin, Ethan said. No one knows it exists except me. It'll lead us down the mountain. If they're coming from the north, we still have a chance. Lena's breathing quickened. She tried to stay calm, but the sound of distant engines echoed faintly through the forest. They were getting closer. Ethan grabbed a small backpack, threw in some essentials, and handed Lena a jacket. Stay close to me. Don't say a word. They slipped out the back door and began moving quickly along the hidden trail. The forest was thick, the path narrow, and every step echoed with tension. Birds scattered as they passed. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of pine and something else, something metallic. Lena suddenly stopped. Ethan, look. He followed her gaze and saw tire tracks cutting through the mud. Fresh ones. They weren't alone. Ethan pulled her behind a large boulder. They crouched, barely breathing. Voices drifted through the trees, men calling out orders to each other. They're splitting up, Ethan whispered. They're searching both sides of the trail. What do we do? Lena asked, her voice trembling. We keep moving, he said firmly, and we stay ahead of them. They continued deeper into the forest, the path winding downward. The sound of footsteps behind them grew louder. Whoever was following them was closing the distance. Ethan spotted a narrow ravine up ahead. We can lose them there, he said, but it's steep. You'll have to trust me. I already do, Lena replied without hesitation. Together, they slid down the ravine, dirt and leaves scattering beneath their feet. They reached the bottom breathless but hidden from view. Ethan listened carefully. The pursuers passed by above them, unaware. But he knew this was only temporary. As they continued onward, Lena looked at Ethan with a mixture of gratitude and fear. Why are you helping me? She asked quietly. Ethan didn't answer at first. The truth was complicated, buried deep within memories he never wanted to revisit. Because once, someone saved me when I didn't deserve it, he finally said. Now it's my turn. Lena nodded, understanding more than he expected. But just as they turned the corner of the trail, a shadow moved ahead. A man stepped out, wearing dark gear and holding a communication device. He had been waiting. Ethan froze. Lena gasped. The man raised his hand to speak into his device. Ethan froze the moment the man stepped onto the trail. The forest seemed to stop breathing, and even the wind fell silent. The man's eyes locked on Lena, then shifted to Ethan, narrowing with recognition, as if Ethan wasn't just an obstacle, but someone he had expected to meet. Ethan whispered sharply, "Lena, get behind me, now." The man lifted his communication device slowly, deliberately. His voice went cold. "I've found them. Both targets in sight." Ethan didn't wait for the rest. He lunged forward, slamming the man's wrist against a tree. The device fell into the dirt. Lena stumbled back, heart pounding, as Ethan and the man fought, kicking up leaves and dust across the narrow trail. The man swung violently, but Ethan moved faster. Years of buried instincts surged back reflexes he thought he had lost. Ethan dodged, grabbed the man's arm, and twisted until the attacker dropped to his knees with a grunt of pain. The moment the man tried to reach for the small weapon at his belt, Ethan knocked him unconscious with a sharp blow to the back of the head. Lena stared at him, breathing hard. "How did you—" "Later," Ethan said, grabbing her hand. "We need to move before his team checks in." They ran deeper into the forest. The path narrowed, forcing them to move single file, branches scratching their arms and faces. Behind them, distant voices grew louder. Others had heard the scuffle. Every second mattered now. "We can't outrun them forever," Lena whispered, struggling to keep pace. "We don't need to outrun them," Ethan replied. "We just need to reach the ridge." "What's at the ridge?" "A chance." Ethan didn't elaborate. Lena didn't ask again. As they pushed through the trees, Ethan's mind raced. He had hoped never to return to the ridge, never to revisit the place where he left behind a life defined by danger. But now he had no choice. The trail opened slightly as they climbed higher. The air thinned, but the forest grew denser, shielding them from sight. The sun had risen fully now, casting long beams through the branches. Ethan stopped for a moment, listening. "They're spreading out. We've got maybe a few minutes." Lena leaned against a tree, catching her breath. "Why are they so determined to silence me?" Ethan looked at her, eyes steady. "Because you know something that can destroy them. And people like this, people with power and no conscience, they don't fear consequences. They fear exposure." Lena tightened her grip around the flash drive in her pocket. "Then we can't let them win." Ethan nodded. "We won't." They kept climbing until the forest thinned. The ridge was close. Now Lena could sense the air shift, feel the ground rising sharply beneath her feet. But just before they reached the clearing, The sound of snapping twigs echoed behind them. "They found the trail," Ethan whispered. Lena turned, panic rising again. "What do we do?" Ethan pointed toward a narrow passage between two massive rocks. "Through there. Hurry." They squeezed through just as footsteps entered the clearing behind them. Lena could hear the voices closer now, angrier, more desperate. "The tracker stopped here," one of the men said. "They must be close." Ethan guided Lena through the passage until they emerged onto a wide, rocky plateau. Below them stretched a view of the valley, vast, open, and silent. "This is the ridge?" Lena asked, surprised. "Yes," Ethan answered us. "And down there," he pointed toward a winding path barely visible from above, "is the old service road. If we reach it, we can get to town before they circle around." "But they're right behind us," Lena said. "I know." Ethan scanned the area quickly. There were no hiding spots, just rocks, gravel, and a steep drop on one side. "We're exposed here. We have to move fast." Before they could take another step, a gunshot cracked through the air. Lena screamed as the bullet struck the rock inches from her shoulder. Dust exploded upward. Ethan pulled her down instinctively. "Stay low." They crawled behind a heavy boulder as another shot whistled past. Ethan peeked around the edge. 3 men had emerged from the passage, weapons drawn. They weren't here to capture. They were here to eliminate. "They're too close," Lena whispered, voice trembling. Ethan's mind raced. He couldn't fight 3 armed men on open ground. He needed another plan. Then he saw it, a narrow ledge running along the cliffside. Dangerous, unstable, barely wide enough for one person, but it led downward toward the service road. "Lena," he whispered urgently, "we're going to take the ledge." She glanced at the cliff, fear filling her eyes. "Ethan, that drop." "It's our only chance," he said. "If we stay here, they'll corner us. If we take the ledge, they'll hesitate to follow." Lena swallowed hard, nodding. She trusted him now completely. Her life depended on it. Ethan led the way onto the ledge. The drop beside them was terrifying, hundreds of feet of open air. The wind pushed against them, threatening their balance. Lena kept one hand on the rock wall, the other holding the flash drive tightly. Behind them, the men reached the plateau. One shouted, "They're going along the cliff." "Don't look back," Ethan said softly. "Look at me, one step at a time." Lena focused on his voice, steady and calm despite everything. They moved slowly but steadily. The edge crumbled under their feet at moments, sending stones tumbling down the cliff, disappearing into the valley below. Gunshots rang out again. One bullet chipped the rock a foot from Lena. She gasped, nearly slipping, but Ethan grabbed her arm, pulled her steady. "You're okay. Keep going." Finally, the ledge widened slightly, leading to a sloped path. They scrambled down it, sliding on loose gravel until their feet hit solid ground again. Ethan pulled Lena into a cluster of thick bushes for cover. "They'll have to take the long way down," Ethan said. "We've got a few minutes." Lena looked at him, shaking. I can't believe we made it. We're not done yet, Ethan replied. There's an outpost at the end of the service road. If we get there, we can access a secure line. We can expose everything. And what if they're waiting for us? Then we face them together. They ran along the dirt road, the forest on both sides rising like walls. The sound of the men shouting behind them grew faint as the distance increased. Lena felt a strange strength growing inside her, fear transforming into determination. As they rounded a bend, the outpost came into view, a small building with a radio tower behind it. Hope surged through Lena's chest. But Ethan suddenly stopped. Lena froze too. What is it? A black SUV was parked outside an outpost. Its engine was running. Someone had gotten there first. Ethan pulled Lena behind a fallen tree. Stay down. The SUV door opened. A woman stepped out tall, sharp-eyed, dressed in the same tactical gear as the pursuers. But her posture was different, as if she wasn't here to chase. She looked straight toward the forest. Ethan Walker, she called calmly, I know you're out there. I'm not here to kill you. Ethan tensed. He knew that voice. Lena whispered, Who is she? Ethan swallowed hard. Someone I never wanted to see again. The woman stepped closer. If you want the truth exposed, come out. We don't have much time. Lena grabbed Ethan's arm. Do we trust her? Ethan stared at the woman, memories flashing through his mind like lightning. And then he made his choice. To be continued. Their fight for truth is far from over, and the next move could cost them everything. Stay with us for the next chapter. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel.